What happens when you try to escape the Imperium? I thought freedom waited somewhere in the endless void. That was before I learned the truth. The galaxy offers no refuge from his sight. I stole a ship and fled across star systems, only to discover that every world I found was already dead, enslaved, or consumed by powers far worse than the one I escaped. Now I am hunted by Imperial patrols, rogue traders, and Xenos alike. But the most terrifying hunter of all? The Imperium that lives inside my own mind. How do you run from what you have become? They never tell you what happens when you decide you no longer want his protection. My name is Ral Vex. I was a guardsman of the 107th Cadian, a regiment with history stretching back 12 generations. I held a lasrifle in my hands before I could properly write my own name. I killed my first heretic at 14, a thin man with 3 eyes who begged for mercy in a language I did not understand. I was commended for not hesitating. The colonel himself placed a hand on my shoulder and told me I had done the Emperor's work. I believed him. I believed all of it, for so very long. The city of Varadim was where everything changed. A hive settlement on the eastern continent of Acrelius IV, population approximately 3 million souls. We were deployed there after reports of mutation and possible cult activity. Standard protocol, we had done this a dozen times before. Sweep the underhives, find the deviants, burn the corruption, restore order. The commissar said it would take a week at most. We found them in the lower manufactory district, 200 or so citizens, hiding in the maintenance tunnels beneath the factorum, men and women, some with extra fingers, some with scaled patches of skin, one child whose eyes glowed faintly in the dark. They surrendered immediately. They had no weapons. They showed no resistance. Containment protocols, the commissar announced over the vox. Prepare for purification. I expected arrests, interrogations, public executions perhaps. To make an example, that would have been harsh but familiar. What I did not expect was the order that came down from orbit 6 hours later. Exterminatus of Hive, Varadim authorized. All forces withdraw to minimum safe distance. I still remember standing on that ridge, 20 kilometers from the city limits, watching as the firestorm descended from the belly of the Imperial cruiser hanging in the sky. The city burned so bright it left an afterimage on my retinas that I still see when I close my eyes. 3 million souls. 3 million Imperial citizens. Loyal workers and tithe payers whose only crime was living in proximity to mutation, all reduced to ash because eradication was simpler than discernment. That night, as my regiment celebrated another victory for the Imperium, I made my decision. I would no longer be part of this madness. No longer would I kill in his name. No longer would I burn worlds for his glory. I would escape. I would find somewhere, anywhere, beyond his reach. I stole a maintenance uniform from the supply depot, took a shuttle to the orbital station under the pretense of equipment retrieval. There, amid the chaos of war preparations, I found my opportunity. A small freighter, the Miserere, scheduled for departure to the neighboring system with a cargo of munitions. The security was minimal, the pilot drunk on victory and amasek. I waited until he passed out in a station bar, then slipped aboard and hid myself in the cargo hold. 3 hours later, as the freighter broke orbit, I permitted myself a single moment of hope. I was free. Free of the Imperium, free of his gaze. How naive I was. The Miserere's navigation charts became my first lesson in the true scale of Imperial dominion. Every system within a month's journey was firmly under his control. Every habitable world bore the Imperial Aquila. There was nowhere to run, not in any direction that would not eventually lead me back into his grasp. So, I set a course for the void between systems, for the dark places between stars. I would find the forgotten corners of the galaxy, the spaces where even his light could not reach. I had enough supplies to last 6 months if I rationed carefully. The freighter's machine spirit was cooperative, once I learned to sing the proper hymns of maintenance. I taught myself to read the star charts, to understand the warp currents, to navigate the treacherous paths between Imperial territories. I did not know then that in fleeing his reach, I was opening myself to the touch of far worse things, things that wait in the darkness between worlds, things that whisper to those who drift too far from the Emperor's light. But that understanding would come later. In those first weeks of freedom, I knew only the intoxication of choice. For the first time in my life, no commissar stood over my shoulder. No regimental protocol dictated my waking hours. No prayers needed to be spoken unless I wished it. The silence was deafening. The freedom terrifying. I found myself speaking aloud simply to hear a human voice. I maintained military discipline out of habit, making my cot with regulation corners, cleaning my stolen sidearm daily, though I had no one to report to. I even caught myself whispering fragments of Imperial prayer in moments of stress, the words rising unbidden to my lips. The Imperium was still inside me, like a disease I could not purge. I had escaped its borders but not its conditioning. Not yet. My first destination was a small mining outpost designated X-227 on the charts. It orbited a dead star, far from established Imperial shipping lanes. The kind of place where questions were rarely asked, where a man might disappear. I docked the Miserere with minimal communication, claiming engine trouble and a need for supplies. The outpost hung in the void like a collection of metal bubbles, connected by transparent tubes through which I could see figures moving. As I cycled through the airlock, the first thing that struck me was the smell. After months breathing the recycled air of the freighter, the rich mixture of human sweat, machine oil, and unfamiliar spices was overwhelming. The second thing I noticed was the silence that fell as I entered the common area. 30 pairs of eyes turned to regard me, and in each of them I saw the same thing: fear. Imperial? A gruff voice called from the back of the room. An older man with augmetic eyes stepped forward, his hand resting casually near a holstered weapon. "No," I replied, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Free trader, engine troubles." The tension in the room did not dissipate. I realized then that I still walked like a guardsman, still held myself with military bearing. The Imperium had marked me as surely as if I wore my uniform. "We don't want trouble here," the man said. "We pay our tithes. The administratum knows we exist." "I'm not here for tithes," I said, "or for trouble, just repairs and supplies. I can pay." I held up a pouch of throne gelt, the currency of the Imperium. Another mistake. Their eyes fixed on the golden coins bearing his face, and I saw something harden in their expressions. "No Imperial currency," the man said, "draws the wrong kind of attention. You have anything else to trade?" I did not. Everything I possessed was stolen from the Imperium. I was about to admit defeat when a voice spoke from my left. "I'll help him." She was tall, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that reflected the light strangely. Later I would learn she was a void-born, one who had never known planetary gravity. Her name was Lysandra, and she worked as a navigator and mechanic. "You'll vouch for him, Lys?" the old man asked, suspicious. "I'll keep him out of trouble," she replied with a shrug, "and take whatever he can pay in Imperial coin. Been meaning to visit a proper Forge world anyway." And so began my first tenuous alliance since desertion. Lysandra led me through the twisting and corridors of the outpost to her workshop, a cluttered space filled with salvaged machinery and hand-drawn star charts. She did not ask why I was running. She did not need to. "Everyone here is running from something," she told me as she examined the Miserere's engine schematics. "The Imperium mostly, some from worse things." "Are there places truly beyond Imperial reach?" I asked. She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You really are fresh out, aren't you? No, little soldier. There is nowhere the Imperium cannot eventually reach if it decides you're worth the effort. But there are places where it hasn't bothered to look too hard. Places where the effort of conquest outweighs the reward." "That's where I need to go," I said. Lysandra regarded me with those strange reflective eyes. "Those places have other dangers, things the Imperium actually protects you from, whether you believe it or not. I didn't believe it then. I would learn. There's a system, she said finally, tracing a pattern on one of her star charts. About 3 weeks' journey from here, following the shadow of the halo stars. No official name, just a designation in the old records. CX9173, 3 planets orbiting a yellow dwarf star. Middle one might be habitable. No recorded Imperial presence for at least 4 centuries. Why? I asked. If it's habitable, because it's too close to the veiled region, she said, as if that explained everything. When she saw my blank expression, she sighed. Veil Nebula. Strange warp currents. Ships go missing. Standard Imperial policy is to avoid it unless absolutely necessary. It sounded perfect. A place the Imperium deliberately avoided. A place where I might truly escape his gaze. Can you repair my ship to make the journey? I asked. I can, she replied. But I won't. That journey requires better navigation than your stolen freighter can provide. I stiffened. I never said it was stolen. Lysandra smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. You didn't need to. Everything about you screams deserter. The way you stand, the way you check exits, the regulation haircut growing out. The fact that you're piloting a munitions freighter with no idea how its warp engine actually works. I reached for my sidearm, but her hand shot out with inhuman speed, catching my wrist. I don't care, she said, her grip painfully tight. The Imperium has never done me any favors, but if you want to reach CX9173 alive, you need a better ship. And a better pilot. Are you offering your services? I asked. For a price. She nodded. Half of whatever cargo you're carrying, and you take me as far as the system. Then the ship is yours, and I'll find my own way back. It seemed too good to be true, and of course, it was. But desperation makes fools of careful men. I agreed to her terms. We spent 3 days transferring essential supplies and components from the Miserere to her ship, a sleek vessel she called the Vesper Wind. It was smaller than the freighter, but faster, with modifications I did not recognize. Only later would I learn that some of those modifications were Xenos in origin, heretical technology that would have seen us both burned had we been discovered within Imperial space. But by then, we were already far beyond the reach of Imperial patrols, following the dark currents between stars toward my supposed freedom. The journey to CX9173 was my first experience with true void travel. On Imperial ships, the common crew rarely witnessed the transition to warp space. We were kept in our quarters, told to pray and wait until the journey was complete. But on the Vesper Wind, I watched through the viewport as reality itself tore open before us, the impossible colors of the Empyrean spilling into real space like luminescent blood. Don't stare too long, Lysandra warned as she guided the ship through the breach. The warp looks back. I thought she was speaking metaphorically until I noticed the whispers, faint voices at the edge of hearing, speaking words that seemed almost familiar but twisted somehow, promising things I had never admitted to wanting. I jerked my gaze away from the viewport, cold sweat beading on my forehead. You feel them, Lysandra observed. Not a question. What are they? I asked. The things that live between worlds, she replied, her attention on her controls. The things your Imperium burns entire planets to keep at bay. For the first time since Varadim, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if the Imperium's brutality had purpose? What if the horrors I had participated in were necessary to hold back worse atrocities? No, I could not allow myself to think that way. To accept such reasoning would be to justify every crime committed in his name. Every innocent burned. Every life sacrificed on the altar of his supposed protection. The whispers grew louder as we traveled deeper into the shadows of the halo stars. Lysandra maintained our course with tense concentration, occasionally making adjustments based on readings I could not interpret. Once, she ordered me to shut down all non-essential systems and remain absolutely silent for nearly 6 hours. We drifted through a region of space that appeared empty to my eyes but filled her with obvious dread. "Patrol?" I asked when she finally allowed power to be restored. "Worse," she replied, but would not elaborate. On the 18th day of our journey, the Vesper wind shuddered violently as we dropped out of warp space. Emergency alarms wailed throughout the ship. Lysandra's hands flew across the controls, her expression grim. "What's happening?" I demanded. "Something's wrong with the current," she said. "The warp is unstable here, different from the charts." The viewport showed only normal space now, a yellow star visible in the distance. We had arrived at CX 9173, but something was clearly not right. The ship's augurs were displaying contradictory readings, some showing 3 planetary bodies as expected, others showing none. "That's impossible," Lysandra muttered. "A star system doesn't just change." But as we cautiously approached, the truth became undeniable. Where the charts showed 3 planets, we found only one, orbiting at the distance where the habitable world should have been. Of the other 2 planets there was no sign. "Could the charts be wrong?" I asked. Lysandra shook her head. "These are rogue trader charts, expensive, accurate." She ran another scan, frowning at the results. "And the composition is all wrong. This planet is. I've never seen readings like this." As we established orbit, I got my first view of what should have been my sanctuary. The planet below was gray-brown, its surface etched with patterns that seemed almost deliberate, like vast circuit diagrams or arcane symbols. No visible bodies of water, no green of vegetation, just the endless geometric patterns covering entire continents. "Is it dead?" I asked. "No," Lysandra replied, her voice hushed. "It's awake." Before I could ask what she meant, the ship's Vox system activated of its own accord. A sound emerged that was not quite language, not quite machine code. A rhythmic sequence of tones and static that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Lysandra moved with sudden urgency, slapping the emergency thruster controls. The Vesper wind lurched violently away from the planet. "What are you doing?" I shouted, grabbing a support rail to keep from being thrown across the bridge. "Getting us out of here," she replied, her voice tight with fear. "Now." "But the planet is not a planet," she cut me off. "It's a tomb. A Necron tomb world." The word meant nothing to me then. As a common guardsman, I had been taught of only the most common Xenos threats: orcs, the Eldar, the forces of chaos. The ancient race of living metal that slept beneath the surfaces of countless worlds was deemed knowledge too dangerous for ordinary soldiers. I would learn soon enough. As the Vesper wind accelerated away from the planet, the Vox continued to emit that terrible knot sound. Then, without warning, a section of the planet's surface shifted. Enormous panels of what I had taken to be stone slid apart, revealing a chasm of green light beneath. "Throne of Terror," Lysandra whispered, all pretense of disdain for the Imperium forgotten in her terror. "They're waking." Something emerged from the chasm. A vessel of impossible design, all sharp angles and glowing sigils, moving with a grace that defied its apparent mass. It rose from the planet with deliberate slowness, orienting toward our fleeing ship. "Can we outrun it?" I asked. "No one outruns the Necrons," Lysandra replied, but she pushed the engines harder nonetheless. "Our only hope is to reach the warp before they decide we're worth the effort to pursue." The Necron vessel made that decision for us. A beam of Viridian energy lanced out, striking the Vesper wind's port side. Systems failed instantly across the ship. The artificial gravity fluctuated, sending us floating momentarily before crashing back to the deck. Emergency lighting bathed everything in blood-red illumination. "Warp engine is offline," Lysandra reported, her fingers dancing across the failing controls. "We can't jump. Can we fight?" I asked, reaching for my sidearm as if a guardsman's pistol would make any difference against a Xenos warship. Lysandra actually laughed, a sound of pure hysteria. Fight the Necrons? With what? Harsh language? Another beam struck us, more precisely this time. I felt a strange sensation, as if my very atoms were being pulled apart and reassembled incorrectly. The metal of the ship around us seemed to shimmer and blur. Teleportation beam, Lysandra gasped. They're taking us. The last thing I remember before unconsciousness claimed me was the sight of gleaming metal figures materializing on the bridge. Skeletal forms with eyes of burning emerald fire, moving with the terrible patience of predators who know their prey cannot escape. In my darkening vision, I thought I saw the Imperial Aquila, burning in the void beyond the viewport. Watching. Judging. The Emperor protects. The old prayer goes. But who protects those who flee his protection? I awoke to perfect darkness and the sensation of metal against my back. Not the familiar metal of a ship's deck, but something colder, more precise, as if each molecule had been deliberately placed according to some alien mathematics. I could not move. Some force held me immobile, though I felt no physical restraints. My breathing was the only sound, echoing slightly as if in a vast space. Then came the light, not the warm illumination of flame or the harsh glare of imperial lumens, but a cold green radiance that seemed to emanate from the metal itself. It revealed a chamber of impossible architecture, where angles met in ways that hurt the mind to perceive. The walls were covered in those same circuit-like patterns I had observed on the planet's surface, but here they pulsed with energy, as if the entire structure were a living thing. Before me stood one of the metal figures I had glimpsed on the ship. Closer now, I could see the details of its construction. It resembled a fleshless human skeleton rendered in living metal, but with proportions subtly wrong, too tall, too thin. Its skull-like face was frozen in a rictus grin, the emerald fire of its eyes regarding me with what I can only describe as clinical curiosity. Where was Lysandra? What had happened to the ship? Questions burned in my mind, but I could not speak, could not move, could only watch as the metal figure raised a hand in which it held some kind of device. It spoke, not in words, but in that same not sound I had heard over the Vox, a series of clicks and electronic tones that bypassed my ears entirely and seemed to resonate directly within my skull. I did not understand the language, but somehow I grasped the intent. Subject acquired, analysis proceeding, the device in its hand, activated, projecting a field of green light that passed over my body from head to foot. I felt nothing physically, but a sense of violation pervaded me, as if this thing were reading not just my biological structure but something deeper, my thoughts, my memories, my very soul, if such a thing existed. More of the metal figures entered the chamber. They moved with perfect coordination, their steps making no sound despite their apparent weight. They conferred in their clicking language, occasionally turning their burning gaze upon me. Then, to my horror, they began to change. Their metal bodies flowed like liquid, reforming into new shapes, and the shapes they chose were human, not perfect replicas. There was still something fundamentally wrong about their proportions, their movements, but they fashioned themselves crude approximations of human form. One even molded its features to create a grotesque parody of my own face. They were learning, adapting, using me as a template. The one with my face approached, its movement a stuttering imitation of human gait. It reached out with fingers too long and too jointed, touching my cheek with a coldness that burned. "Guardsman Ral Vex," it said, in a voice that was my own yet utterly devoid of humanity. "Deserter, traitor to your Imperium." They had taken my memories, my knowledge, my identity. "You seek escape," the thing continued. "There is no escape, only transition." It turned to its companions and emitted a series of rapid clicks. The others responded in kind, their burning gazes never leaving me. "Your biological form is inefficient," my doppelganger stated. "We will improve it. You will serve the awakening." Service, always service. I had fled the Imperium to escape being a tool, only to be captured for the same purpose by something infinitely more alien. With a gesture from the leader, the paralysis field holding me released. I collapsed to the metal floor, my limbs numb and unresponsive. Before I could attempt to move, skeletal hands seized me, lifting me as effortlessly as if I were a child. They carried me deeper into their impossible structure, through corridors that seemed to fold in upon themselves, past chambers where other metal figures worked at tasks I could not comprehend. In some rooms, I glimpsed other organic beings, not all humans, suspended in fields of energy, their bodies partially disassembled as the Necrons studied them with their remorseless curiosity. I saw Lysandra among them. Her void-born physiology had apparently marked her as something of special interest. The Necrons had removed her limbs and portions of her skull, replacing them with their own technology. Her eyes, those strange reflective orbs, had been extracted and placed in some kind of containment field where they continued to move, tracking the movements of her tormentors. She was conscious, I realized with horror. Conscious and aware throughout her dismantling. I struggled then, a sudden surge of strength born of terror giving me momentary resistance. It made no difference. The metal hands simply tightened, threatening to crush bone if I continued. They brought me to a chamber dominated by a platform of black stone veined with glowing green energy. Above it hung apparatus of such alien design that my mind could not process their function. Sharp implements, containers of swirling metallic fluid, crystalline structures that seemed to exist partially in some other dimension. The Necron wearing my face directed the others to place me on the platform. The stone was colder than ice, seeming to draw the very heat from my body on contact. Restraints of energy materialized, binding me in place. "Your Imperium sought to shape you into a weapon," my doppelganger stated. "We will complete the process. Flesh will surrender to necrodermis. Consciousness will merge with the command protocol. You will become perfection." "I would rather die," I managed to say, finding my voice at last. The thing's face shifted in what might have been an attempt at a smile. Death is a concept we transcended eons ago. There is only transformation. It raised its hand, and the apparatus above me hummed to life. Blades of impossible sharpness descended toward my immobilized form. I closed my eyes, preparing for pain beyond imagining. Then the chamber shook violently. A sound like thunder rolled through the structure. The Necrons turned as one, their burning gazes directed toward the source of the disturbance. More of their clicking language, rapid and urgent now. The restraints holding me did not falter, but the apparatus retracted slightly. My doppelganger approached a wall which transformed at its touch into a viewing portal of some kind. Through it, I could see space outside their structure and the unmistakable shape of Imperial ships, not just any ships. The distinctive profile of an inquisitorial black ship accompanied by escorts. They had found me. Whether they had tracked the Vesper wind or simply detected the awakening Necron tomb world, the result was the same. The Imperium had arrived. My doppelganger turned back to me. "Your Imperium comes, not for you, for us. The endless war resumes." It gestured, and two of its companions moved to continue the procedure. But another explosion rocked the chamber, more violent than the first. Systems flickered. For an instant, just an instant, the energy restraints holding me weakened. It was enough. Years of combat training took over. I rolled from the platform, my body screaming in pain as circulation returned to numbed limbs. I fell to the floor, scrambling beneath the platform as the Necrons moved to recapture me. Another impact, larger this time. Emergency protocols activated throughout the structure. The green light flickered, replaced by a deeper emerald glow. The Necrons' attention divided between me and the attack. My doppelganger spoke again, this time addressing its companions rather than me. "Threat assessment indicates inquisitorial forces. Activation sequence compromised. Initiate emergency stasis protocol." The other Necrons immediately ceased pursuit, turning toward what appeared to be defensive positions. My doppelganger lingered, its burning gaze fixed on me where I huddled beneath the platform. "The Imperium will not save you, deserter," it said. "They will burn you with us. If not today, then when they find you next. The galaxy offers no sanctuary for defiance." Then it too departed, moving with inhuman speed toward some unknown destination deeper within the tomb complex. I was alone, temporarily forgotten in the chaos of battle. I had only moments before either the Necrons remembered me or the Imperial forces reduced this entire section to molten slag. Forcing my trembling legs to support me, I staggered from my hiding place. The corridors outside were in disarray, Necron warriors moving with purpose toward defensive positions. None spared me a glance. To them, a single human was an irrelevance compared to the Imperial threat. I had no plan, no destination, only the desperate instinct to flee, away from both the soulless metal Xenos and the equally merciless Imperium. I ran through corridors chosen at random, each identical to the last in their alien geometries. By chance or fate, I found myself in what appeared to be a docking bay of sorts. The architecture opened to the void of space, held back by energy fields that permitted the passage of vessels while containing atmosphere. Several smaller Necron craft rested on platforms, their designs as incomprehensible as everything else in this nightmare realm. Through the energy field, I could see the battle raging. Imperial ships firing lance batteries that dissected portions of the tomb structure with surgical precision. Necron vessels rising from the planet's surface, their weapons systems awakening to return fire with beams of viridian energy that simply erased whatever they touched from existence. Neither side cared about one deserting guardsman. I was less than nothing in this clash of ancient enemies. One of the smaller Necron vessels sat closer to me than the others. It resembled a crescent moon rendered in the same living metal as its creators, large enough perhaps to transport a dozen of the skeletal warriors. No obvious entrance was visible, no control interfaces that I could recognize, but as I approached, hesitant and desperate, a section of its hull simply reconfigured. Metal flowed like water, creating an opening just large enough for a human form to enter. It was inviting me in. Every instinct, every fragment of Imperial conditioning screamed that this was heresy beyond measure. To willingly enter Xenos technology, to allow it to envelop me, this was corruption of the highest order. Another explosion rocked the tomb structure. Through the energy field, I saw an Imperial escort vessel split apart under concentrated Necron fire, its crew exposed to void in an instant of silent horror. I had no choice. Death by Imperial executioners, death by Necron vivisection, death in the crossfire of their ancient hatred, or the slim chance of survival offered by this alien craft that seemed to be offering itself to me. I stepped inside. The opening sealed behind me, metal flowing together seamlessly as if it had never existed. The interior was a single chamber, illuminated by the same green light that pervaded all Necron technology. No visible controls, no seats or harnesses, just an empty space of gleaming metal. "How do I began aloud, then gasped as the floor beneath me shifted. The metal rose, forming a platform that elevated me to the center of the chamber. More metal flowed, creating a kind of cradle that partially enclosed my body. The craft knew what I wanted. Or perhaps it was simply responding to pre-programmed protocols. Either way, I felt movement as it disengaged from its docking platform and moved toward the energy field separating us from the void. We passed through the barrier, and suddenly we were in space, accelerating away from the tomb world and the battle surrounding it. Through some means I could not perceive, the craft was showing me our surroundings, as if the hull had become transparent from within while remaining solid from without. I watched as the Imperial and Necron ships grew smaller behind us, neither force apparently noticing or caring about the departure of one small vessel. The tomb world itself receded, its surface now alive with the green fire of fully awakened Necron technology. For the second time, I had escaped, fled from the Imperium I had sworn to serve, and now fled from the Xenos horror that had nearly remade me in its image. But this time, my vessel of escape was itself Xenos technology of the highest order. I had traded one corruption for another. and I had no idea how to control the craft that carried me or where it might be taking me. As the Necron ship carried me away from the battle, I became aware of a subtle change in the chamber around me. The metal cradle holding my body was integrating. Tendrils of liquid metal had begun to extend across my limbs, paper-thin filaments that spread like a web over my skin. I tried to pull away, but the cradle held me fast. Not painfully, but with irresistible strength. The filaments continued their advance, some now thin enough to slip beneath my skin without breaking it, a sensation like ice water flowing through my veins. No, I gasped, understanding coming too late. The vessel was not simply a means of escape. It was an extension of Necron technology, designed to transform its occupant just as surely as the apparatus in the tomb would have done. But something was different. There was no pain, no sense of violation as the filaments spread through my body. Instead, I felt a growing awareness, as if new senses were awakening. I could feel the ship around me, not as something separate, but as an extension of myself. Its systems, incomprehensible before, now seemed intuitive, its purpose clear. This was not a warship or even a transport in the conventional sense. It was a seed, a probe, sent out by the awakening tomb world to gather information, to find suitable locations for further expansion. Its mission, now my mission, was to travel far from the conflict, observe, record, and eventually return with its findings. But the consciousness guiding it was meant to be Necron, not human. My organic mind was an imperfect match for its systems. I could influence our course, but not fully control it. I could perceive our surroundings through its senses, but the information came to me in alien patterns that my brain struggled to interpret. We accelerated away from CX-9173, following a trajectory that would take us deeper into the region Lysandra had called the Veiled Nebula. The ship knew of paths through the warp currents that no Imperial navigator would dare to follow, regions where reality itself grew thin, where the barriers between dimensions wavered. I should have been terrified, should have fought against the integration, tried to assert control over our course, but a strange calm had settled over me. The part of me that was still Ral Vex, still human, seemed to be receding, observing from a distance as something new took shape in the interface between my consciousness and the ship's systems, not Necron, not human, something between. Through the ship's senses, I became aware of pursuit. Not from the battle behind us, both the Imperium and the Necrons remained fully engaged with each other. This was something else, a sleek vessel of elegant design, moving through the void with impossible grace. Eldar, the ancient enemies of mankind and Necron alike, a race as alien as the metal overlords, but organic, psychically gifted, and possessed of technology that made even the mighty Imperium seem primitive by comparison. Their ship was small, likely a scout vessel. It followed us with clear purpose, matching our gong, of course changes with fluid precision. The Necron vessel recognized the threat, accelerating further, pushing toward the heart of the Veiled Nebula, where warp storms made conventional travel impossible. But the Eldar were not using conventional means. Their vessel seemed to skip through real space like a stone across water, appearing and disappearing in bursts of prismatic light. They were gaining. My fragmented consciousness analyzed options. The Necron craft was not designed for combat. Its purpose was observation, infiltration. Against an Eldar warship, it stood no chance. But it had other defenses. Without conscious decision on my part, the ship activated countermeasures. The metal of its hull reconfigured, spawning crystalline structures that captured light and bent it around our vessel. To outside observers, we would seem to shimmer and fade, our exact position becoming uncertain. A primitive version of Necron phase technology, I realized. Not true teleportation or dimensional shifting, but enough to confuse sensors and create false readings. The Eldar were not deceived. Their pursuit continued, though their approach slowed, became more cautious. They fired no weapons, made no hostile moves beyond their relentless tracking. They were curious, I realized. Intrigued by the sight of a lone Necron vessel fleeing from battle, behaving in ways inconsistent with known Necron protocols. Through the ship's senses, I felt a subtle pressure, a psychic probe, delicate but insistent, seeking to understand what manner of consciousness guided the Necron vessel. The Eldar were attempting to communicate or to infiltrate my mind. I instinctively recoiled, and the Necron technology responded to my fear. The metal filaments penetrating my body pulsed with energy, creating a shield around my thoughts. The pressure receded, but I sensed surprise from the Eldar vessel. They had detected something unexpected, something neither Necron nor human, but a hybrid of both. Their pursuit intensified. Whatever I had become was of great interest to them, perhaps representing a threat or an opportunity. The Necron vessel pushed its systems to their limits, approaching the heart of the nebula where reality itself began to fray. Ahead loomed a swirling mass of colors no human eye was meant to perceive. The boundary of a warp storm, where the Imperium bled into real space in a chaotic maelstrom. No navigator would guide a ship through such turbulence. No Geller field could withstand the forces at play in such a region. But the Necron vessel was neither warp-capable nor dependent on the protections required by organic life. It could traverse the edge of the storm, using the gravitational distortions and electromagnetic interference as cover. The Eldar vessel hesitated at the boundary. Even their advanced technology and psychic mastery had limits. To follow us into the storm would be to risk destruction. I felt a final psychic touch, stronger this time, more focused. Not an attack, but a message, impressed directly upon my consciousness in concepts rather than words. Abomination, dangerous, return, then an image, startlingly clear. A world of crystal spires and living ships, of beings with minds that spanned millennia and bodies engineered for perfection. A sanctuary, an offer. They were inviting me to surrender, to come with them to one of their hidden worlds, where they would study what I had become and, perhaps, separate me from the Necron technology if that was still possible. For a moment, I was tempted. The Eldar were enemies of mankind, yes, but also enemies of the Necrons and the forces of chaos. Their civilization, though faded from its ancient glory, represented a kind of order, a balance. Perhaps they could undo what was happening to me. But the Necron vessel had its mission. And now, so did I. To explore, to observe, to find what lay beyond the reach of Imperial authority and Necron dominion alike. I rejected the Eldar's offer, pushing their psychic touch away with newfound strength. The ship responded to my decision, accelerating into the boundary of the warp storm, where energy discharges the size of continents arced through the void. The Eldar did not follow. Their vessel banked away, returning to whatever hidden purpose had first brought them to this region. But I sensed they would report what they had found. Another player had entered the game, aware of my existence. I was no longer simply a deserter fleeing Imperial justice. I had become something unique, something that multiple powers in the galaxy might consider worth hunting, worth studying, worth destroying. The warp storm engulfed us, reality dissolving into churning madness outside the ship's hull. But within, protected by technology designed to operate independently of the warp's currents, I drifted into a state between consciousness and hibernation as the vessel continued its journey to unknown destinations. My last coherent thought was that I had achieved what I sought. I had escaped the Imperium's reach. But in doing so, I had placed myself beyond any hope of returning to humanity. I had become the very thing the Imperium burned worlds to prevent. Word count so far, 9,042. Time loses meaning in the void between stars. Doubly so within a warp storm, where reality itself becomes fluid, unreliable. I cannot say how long the Necron vessel carried me through that maelstrom of energies. It might have been days. It might have been years. My consciousness fragmented further during that passage. The human part of me retreated into memory and dream, while the hybrid intelligence born of my integration with the ship's systems maintained our course through the storm. I remember flashes, impressions, vast entities moving in the depths of the warp, their attention sliding over our vessel without recognition. The Necron technology rendered us invisible to them, beneath their notice. For that, at least, I was grateful. When awareness returned in full, we had emerged into real space far from any charted Imperial territory. The storm was behind us, a distant smear of impossible colors against the black. Ahead lay a system unmarked on any chart I had seen, 3 small planets orbiting a red dwarf star. The ship's sensors analyzed the system methodically. The innermost planet was a molten hell, too close to its star. The outermost was a frozen waste of methane ice. But the middle world showed signs of habitability. Atmosphere within human tolerance, liquid water, energy signatures suggesting technology. We approached cautiously, the ship responding to my unspoken directive to avoid detection. As we entered orbit, I beheld a world of stark contrasts. Vast oceans of deep blue covered most of the surface. The land masses were concentrated in a single continent near the equator, a sprawling expanse of green forests and golden plains, and cities. Unmistakably human cities, their geometric patterns revealing an origin in Imperial colonial design. But something was wrong. The energy signatures were too weak, too scattered. No orbital defenses challenged our approach. No Vox communications filled the frequencies that Imperial worlds typically monitored. The ship's sensors detected approximately 12,000 human life forms on the entire planet. For a world of this size, with established infrastructure, the number was impossibly low. I directed the vessel to land near one of the larger settlements, a city built where a river met the ocean. As we descended through cloud cover, I saw the truth. The city was largely in ruins. Buildings stood empty, streets overgrown with native vegetation. The few energy signatures came from the city center, where a small portion of the urban area appeared to be maintained and inhabited. We touched down in what had once been a landing field, now reclaimed by grass and flowering plants I did not recognize. The ship extended sensory tendrils, testing the atmosphere, scanning for threats. Finding none immediate, it prepared to open an egress point in its hull. Before it could do so, I became aware of approaching life forms, humans, moving with purpose toward our landing site. They came in vehicles of Imperial manufacture, but ancient and modified with non-standard components. 23 individuals in total, armed with lasguns and more primitive projectile weapons. They surrounded the ship at a cautious distance, their vehicles forming a perimeter. One figure stepped forward, clearly a leader. Male, elderly by appearance, with augmetic replacements visible at his left eye and right arm. He wore a patchwork of what might once have been Imperial Guard armor, modified and repaired over decades. He raised a Vox amplifier to his mouth. "Identify yourself and state your purpose." His voice boomed, the high Gothic of the Imperium heavily accented but recognizable. "This world is under the protection of the free colony of Hadrian's Rest." The ship translated his words for me, though I would have understood them anyway. My mind raced, considering options. These were humans, apparently isolated from the Imperium, yet still clinging to some of its technology and language. They might provide information, resources, perhaps even a chance to shed the Necron technology that was slowly consuming my humanity. But how would they react to what I had become? I was neither fully human nor Necron now, but something between. The metal filaments had spread throughout my body during our journey, creating a network just beneath my skin that gleamed faintly in the right light. My eyes, I knew without seeing them, now shone with the same green fire as my Necron captors. I made my decision. Knowledge was worth the risk. I directed the ship to open, the metal flowing aside to create an entrance. I stepped out onto the soil of Hadrian's Rest, the first planetary surface I had felt beneath my feet since my captivity in the tomb world. The reaction was immediate, weapons raised, exclamations of shock and disgust. The leader took an involuntary step backward, his augmetic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. "Throne of Terror," he breathed. "What are you?" "My name is Ral Vex," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears after so long communicating only through the ship's systems. I was once a guardsman of the Imperium, now I am something else. Necron, someone in the perimeter spat. Metal abomination. Not entirely, I replied, keeping my hands visible and my posture non-threatening. I am still partly human, still myself. The ship and I are connected, but I retain my own will. The leader studied me, his organic eye narrowed in suspicion while his augmetic one continued its scanning. I am Marshal Hadrian Kell, founder of this colony, and I have seen enough horrors in my lifetime to know when something is not what it claims to be. I seek information, I said. Nothing more. This world, your colony. How did you come to be here, beyond Imperial borders? A bitter laugh escaped the Marshal. Beyond borders. Boy, we were once the proud center of an Imperial subsector. Hadrian's Rest was a thriving agri-world with 16 billion loyal Imperial citizens. I glanced at the ruined city around us. What happened? The Imperium happened, he said, his voice hard. 97 years ago, the subsector was written off. Administrative error. Resource reallocation, strategic withdrawal. The words change depending on which official record you find. The result was the same. Supply ships stopped coming. Astropathic communication ceased. The Administratum simply erased us from their ledgers. Others in the perimeter nodded grimly. This was clearly a story they all knew, a founding mythology for their isolated community. Most worlds in the subsector died quickly. The Marshal continued. Without Imperial supply lines, without the protection of the Imperial Navy, they were easy prey for raiders, Xenos, worse things. We survived because we were the most self-sufficient, the most distant from the warp routes that carried our attackers, and because some of us remembered how to live without the Imperium's oversight. You rebuilt, I observed, looking again at the maintained portion of the city visible in the distance. We survived, he corrected, 12,000 of us, from a population of 16 billion. We abandoned the other cities, consolidated our resources, learned to make do with what we had. Every piece of technology we cannot manufacture ourselves becomes increasingly precious as the years pass. Every skilled worker who dies takes irreplaceable knowledge with them. I processed this information, correlating it with what I knew of Imperial administration. Such errors were not uncommon in a galaxy-spanning bureaucracy. Entire sectors could be forgotten, written off due to clerical mistakes or changing strategic priorities. The citizens of those abandoned regions were simply sacrificed, their lives worth less than the administrative effort required to correct the error. And you never attempted to re-establish contact? I asked. The Marshal's expression darkened. 3 times, we sent ships back toward Imperial space. The first returned with news that the entire sector had been quarantined due to suspected warp contamination. Any approaching vessels were destroyed on sight. The second never returned at all. The third found only dead worlds and debris fields where our neighboring systems had been. He gestured at the armed colonists around us. So we made our choice. Better to live free on a dying world than to beg for scraps at the Emperor's table. Better to face extinction on our own terms than to be sacrificed for administrative convenience. His words resonated with me, echoing my own reasons for desertion. The callous disregard for human life, the sacrifice of billions for expediency or ideology. I had fled the Imperium because I could no longer participate in such atrocities. These people had been victims of the same systemic cruelty. You said you seek information, the Marshal continued, his tone slightly less hostile. What kind of information could a human Necron abomination possibly want from us? I seek a way back to humanity, I answered honestly. And a place beyond both Imperial and Xenos reach where I might live out whatever existence remains to me. A long silence followed my words. The Marshal exchanged glances with his lieutenants, some subtle communication passing between them. Whatever you were before, you are something else now, he finally said, something dangerous, something that could draw unwanted attention to our world if the wrong eyes were watching. He was right, of course. The Eldar had already taken interest in me. The Necrons would seek to reclaim their technology, and the Imperium would burn this entire planet if they discovered a Necron-human hybrid abomination being harbored by human colonists. I will not stay long, I promised, only long enough to learn if there is a way to separate myself from this Xenos technology and where I might go afterward. Another exchange of glances among the colony's leadership, then the Marshal nodded sharply. You will remain here, under guard, while we consult our tech priest. If anyone might understand your condition, it would be Magos Dawn. But be warned, abomination. At the first sign that you pose a threat to this colony, we will destroy you by any means necessary. I inclined my head in acceptance of his terms. What choice did I have? This was the first human contact I had experienced since my desertion. Perhaps the only opportunity I would have to find a way back to humanity. The Marshal barked orders, and 4 of his soldiers approached cautiously, weapons trained on me. They escorted me toward the inhabited portion of the city, leaving others to establish a perimeter around the Necron vessel. I could still feel the ship, its systems maintaining a passive connection to my consciousness, but I made no attempt to activate any of its functions. Better to appear cooperative, harmless. As we walked through the ruins of what had once been a thriving imperial city, I saw the evidence of the colony's struggle for survival. Gardens had been planted in what were once decorative plazas. Smaller buildings had been dismantled, their materials repurposed to reinforce the structures still in use. Primitive windmills and water wheels provided power where more advanced imperial technology had failed. The inhabited zone at the city's center was a stark contrast to the surrounding ruins. Here, buildings were maintained, streets kept clear. People moved about with purpose, carrying tools or goods, tending to community gardens, repairing machinery. Children played under watchful eyes. It was a functioning society, but one clearly operating with limited resources and constant awareness of its precarious existence. They had brought me to what had once been an administrative building, now repurposed as the colony's governance center. Inside, the Marshal led me through corridors where parchment had replaced data slates, where mechanical calculators stood in for cogitator arrays. We descended to a lower level, and there I encountered the colony's tech priest. Magos Dawn bore little resemblance to the tech priests I had known in the Imperial Guard. His red robes were faded and patched, his augmetics clearly salvaged and repaired countless times. Only 3 mechadendrites extended from his back, moving with slight irregularities that suggested ongoing maintenance issues. His face remained mostly human, with only his eyes and portions of his jaw replaced by machinery. He looked up from a workbench covered in disassembled components as we entered, his augmetic eyes focusing on me with immediate intensity. "Omnissiah, preserve us," he whispered, setting down his tools and approaching slowly. "What manner of tech heresy is this?" "That is what we brought him to determine," the Marshal said. "Can you analyze its nature? Determine if it poses a threat?" The Magos circled me, mechadendrites extended to scan my form without touching it. Necrodermis integration with human tissue. Impossible. The metal should reject the flesh, consume it, yet they coexist, symbiotic rather than parasitic. He addressed me directly. How was this accomplished? What forge world or tech heretic created such an abomination? "It was not human design," I replied. "I was captured by Necrons. Their vessel integrated with me when I used it to escape. I did not choose this transformation." "Fascinating," the Magos murmured, his interest clearly overriding any revulsion. "A spontaneous integration. The Necron technology must have adapted to preserve your organic components rather than replacing them. Perhaps recognizing the value of human cognitive flexibility compared to the rigid Necron command protocols." He turned to the Marshal. "I must study this further. In controlled conditions, the implications for our understanding of both human physiology and Necron technology are profound." The Marshal frowned. "I did not bring him here for your research, Magos. I need to know if he is a threat to the colony." "All knowledge is worth the risk," the tech priest replied automatically, the mantra of the Mechanicus evident despite his long isolation. "But to answer your question, I detect no immediate danger." The Necron components appeared dormant, responding only to his conscious direction. There is no evidence of external control protocols or autonomous functions that might override his will. His assessment was not entirely accurate. The connection between myself and the ship remained active, and certain Necron protocols had already merged with my consciousness. But I saw no reason to correct him. Better to appear less integrated, less alien than I truly was. "Can it be reversed?" I asked. "Can the Necron technology be removed without killing me?" The Magos paused, his mechadendrites retracting slightly as he considered. "Unknown. The integration appears comprehensive. The filaments have bonded with your nervous system, your organs, even penetrated cellular structures. Separation might be possible with sufficiently advanced technology, but," he gestured at his makeshift workshop, "we barely maintain what Imperial technology we still possess. Nothing here approaches the level of sophistication required for such a procedure." Hope dimmed within me, though I had expected this answer. If even the Mechanicus at the height of its power would struggle with such a task, what chance had this isolated colony with its salvaged technology? "There may be another option," the Magos continued, his voice lowered. "Rumors persist of a Xenotech trading post at the edge of the Halo Stars. A neutral ground where rogue traders, exiled tech priests, even Xenos merchants exchange technologies and services outside Imperial jurisdiction. If anywhere in this sector might possess the knowledge or tools to address your condition, it would be there." The Marshal made a sound of disapproval. "The Nexus? You would send him to that den of heretics and Xenos collaborators?" "I merely provide information," the Magos replied smoothly. "What he does with it is his concern, not ours." I seized on this new possibility. "This Nexus, how would I find it?" The Marshal and the Magos exchanged glances, some unspoken tension evident between them. "The colony maintains minimal contact with the Nexus through necessity," the Marshal finally admitted. "Certain components we cannot manufacture ourselves must be acquired through trade. Navigational coordinates could be provided, though the route is treacherous. Warp storms, raiders, worse things. My vessel can navigate such hazards," I said, confidence born of my connection to the Necron ship's capabilities. The Marshal's expression hardened. "And there lies the problem. You speak of that Xenos craft as if it is an extension of yourself. How can we trust that you have not been subverted entirely, that the human you claim to be still exists at all?" It was a fair question, one I asked myself with increasing frequency as the integration progressed. How much of Ralvex remained? How much was now something else, something alien? "I cannot prove what remains of my humanity," I admitted. "I can only act according to what I believe is right. I have no wish to harm your colony. I seek only to find a way back to what I was, if such a path exists. Or to complete your transformation if it does not," the Magos suggested, his tone indicating scientific curiosity rather than accusation. I had no answer to that. The possibility had occurred to me during the long journey through the warp storm. If humanity was forever beyond my reach, what then? Would I embrace the cold immortality of the Necrons, become a hybrid entity unlike anything in the galaxy, or find some way to end an existence too abhorrent to continue? "I believe his intention is genuine," the Magos said to the Marshal after studying my reaction. "The emotional response patterns remain human, despite the physical changes. I recommend providing the coordinates to the Nexus. Remove the problem from our world and give him the chance to seek his own solution." The Marshal considered, his augmetic eye whirring softly as he studied me. "Very well, but not immediately. You will remain under observation for 3 days. If no hostile action or attempt at communication with your vessel occurs in that time, we will provide what you seek." I accepted these terms with a nod. 3 days was nothing compared to the journey I had already undertaken, and it would provide opportunity to learn more about this colony, perhaps gain insights that might help me navigate whatever waited at this Nexus. They provided quarters for me in a repurposed storage room, sparse but sufficient. Guards were posted outside at all times. The Magos visited frequently, his scientific curiosity overcoming any ideological objections to my existence. From him, I learned more about the colony's history and its tenuous position. The Imperium's reach is not infinite, he told me during one examination. But its memory is long. Even after abandoning this subsector, Imperial forces occasionally pass through. Rogue traders, explorator fleets. Once, even an inquisitorial vessel, though they departed without making contact after scanning the system. They know you're here? I asked. Perhaps. Or perhaps they simply noted a human colony of no strategic value, not worth the resources required to reintegrate it into the Imperium. His mechadendrites probe gently at the filaments visible beneath my skin. The Administratum's calculus is cold. 12,000 souls barely register compared to the trillions under Imperial rule. Yet you maintain Imperial technology, Imperial traditions, I observed. Even after being abandoned. The Magos made a sound that might have been a laugh, mechanical and harsh. What alternative exists? Revert to pre-industrial barbarism. Embrace Xenos technology and risk drawing the attention of Imperial forces that would exterminate us for tech heresy? No. We walk the narrow path. Maintain what we can of human civilization while accepting that we stand outside the Imperium's protection. There was wisdom in his approach. A pragmatic adaptation to circumstances that preserved what was valuable while discarding what could not be sustained. Perhaps there was a lesson there for my own condition. On the third day, the Marshal summoned me to the building's roof. From this vantage point, we could see both the inhabited portion of the city and the ruins stretching beyond, with my Necron vessel still visible as a dark crescent on the distant landing field. Your ship has remained dormant, as you promised, he acknowledged, and you have made no attempt to escape or communicate with it. The Magos believes your intentions are genuine, though he would prefer to continue studying you indefinitely. He handed me a data slate, ancient and carefully maintained. These are the coordinates for the Nexus. The route passes near 2 warp storms and through a region known to be hunted by Orc raiders. Proceed with caution. I accepted the slate, reviewing the navigational data. The Nexus lay at the intersection of several infrequently traveled warp routes, positioned precisely where overlapping dangers made Imperial enforcement difficult, but not where those dangers made travel impossible. A perfect location for illicit trade and exchange of forbidden knowledge. Thank you, I said, looking up from the slate to meet the Marshal's gaze. Your colony has shown unexpected hospitality to something like me. Not hospitality, he corrected. Pragmatism. You represent a potential threat, but also potential knowledge. By directing you elsewhere, we minimize the former while preserving the possibility of the latter. He turned to look out over his domain, the small pocket of humanity clinging to existence on this forgotten world. We survive by making difficult choices, by accepting that sometimes there are no good options, only less ruinous ones. Again, his words resonated with my own experience. Was that not what had driven me to desertion? The recognition that I faced only ruinous choices while serving the Imperium. One last thing, the Marshal said, not looking at me. The Magos believes that your integration with the Necron technology is progressing, not static. That eventually, the balance between human and machine will shift irreversibly toward the latter. I had suspected as much. During my brief stay, I had noticed subtle changes, increased sensory acuity, decreased need for sleep and sustenance, growing awareness of the Necron vessel's capabilities even at this distance. If you find no solution at the Nexus, the Marshal continued, do not return here. This colony survives by remaining, unremarkable, unworthy of notice by greater powers. What you are becoming would draw exactly the kind of attention we cannot afford. I understand, I replied, and I would not endanger what you have built here. He turned back to me, his expression grave. Good hunting, Ral Vex, or whatever name you will bear when your transformation is complete. I departed that same day, walking alone back to the landing field where my Necron vessel waited. No escort accompanied me. They trusted that I would honor my word to leave, or perhaps they simply knew that trying to prevent me would be futile if I chose to use the ship's capabilities against them. As I approached, the vessel's hull flowed open in welcome, the metal cradle reforming to receive me. The connection, dormant during my time in the colony, surged back to full strength as I settled into place. Information flooded my consciousness. The ship had not been as inactive as the colonists believed, its passive sensors constantly gathering data, analyzing the colony's defenses and technology. I could have taken what I wanted from them. The ship's capabilities far exceeded their salvaged Imperial weapons. I could have demanded supplies, information, even human subjects for study if the Necron protocols had fully dominated my thinking. But what remained of Ralvex rejected such courses. These people, abandoned by the Imperium they had served faithfully, were kindred spirits, survivors making their way in a galaxy that cared nothing for their continued existence. The vessel rose from the surface of Hadrian's Rest, accelerating through the atmosphere toward the void beyond. I did not look back at the colony falling away behind us. My path led elsewhere now, toward this nexus and whatever knowledge it might offer about my condition. As we broke orbit, I set course according to the coordinates provided. The journey would be long, passing near territories claimed by various threats, but the Necron vessel's stealth capabilities would serve well in avoiding unwanted attention, or so I believed, until the proximity alert sounded less than a day into our journey. A vessel had appeared seemingly from nowhere, directly in our path. Its configuration was like nothing recorded in Imperial archives or the Necron vessel's memory banks. It resembled a massive arrowhead forged from dark crystal, its surface reflecting the light of distant stars in hypnotic patterns. No visible propulsion systems, no weapon emplacements, yet it moved with deliberate purpose to intercept our course. I initiated evasive maneuvers, but the crystal ship matched them precisely, maintaining position directly ahead, not pursuing or attacking, but clearly preventing our chosen course. A communication attempt registered on the vessel's sensors, not standard Imperial frequencies or protocols, not the psychic touch of Eldar minds. Something else, a pattern of energy pulses directed specifically at the interface between my organic brain and the Necron technology. Against my better judgment, I allowed the communication. The ship translated it into concepts my mind could interpret: abomination, impossibility, convergence of opposing paths. The message was accompanied by an impression of curiosity, of scientific interest not unlike what the Magos had displayed. Whoever or whatever controlled the crystal ship saw me as a specimen worthy of study. I responded with my own concepts, seeking knowledge, seeking reversal, seeking sanctuary. A pause, then new impressions flowed into my mind. Ancient race, observers of cycles, collectors of anomalies. The crystal ship was adjusting its position, opening a pathway while maintaining proximity. An escort rather than a blockade now, guiding rather than intercepting. We seek understanding of your nature, you seek understanding of your condition, convergence of interests. I hesitated. My experiences since desertion had taught me caution when dealing with the unknown. The Necrons had nearly remade me in their image. The Eldar had sought to capture me for their own purposes. This new entity might have similarly self-serving intentions. Yet what choice did I have? The Nexus was my only lead, my only hope for finding a way back to humanity. If these beings knew of it, perhaps they could facilitate my journey. I allowed the crystal ship to guide us, maintaining readiness to activate the vessel's defensive measures if needed. We traveled together for what felt like days, though my perception of time had become increasingly unreliable as the integration progressed. Eventually, a new star system appeared ahead, not the coordinates of the Nexus as provided by the Marshal, but somewhere else entirely. A binary star orbited by a complex arrangement of artificial structures rather than natural planets. Vast crystalline habitats, each unique in design, linked by energy fields and transit corridors of pure light. The crystal ship led us toward one of the smaller habitats at the system's edge. As we approached, a docking bay opened, large enough to accommodate my vessel. Energy fields similar to those I had observed in the Necron tomb world contained atmosphere while permitting our passage. We landed gently in a chamber that reconfigured itself as we settled, the crystalline floor flowing to create supports perfectly matched to the Necron vessel's dimensions. I experienced a moment of déjà vu. Once again, I was faced with the decision to exit my vessel and place myself at the mercy of unknown entities. Once again, the pursuit of knowledge and potential salvation outweighed caution. The ship opened at my command, and I stepped out into the crystal habitat. The atmosphere was breathable, though with an odd sweetness to it that my enhanced senses identified as containing trace elements not present in standard human-compatible environments. Nothing immediately harmful, but a reminder that this place was not designed with human physiology in mind. They were waiting for me. 3 figures standing a respectful distance from the ship, humanoid in general outline, but clearly not human. Their bodies appeared to be composed of the same crystalline material as their ship and habitat, semi-transparent and refracting light in complex patterns. No visible facial features, yet I sensed their focused attention. "Welcome, Convergence entity." One of them spoke, not in words but in directly transmitted concepts that my integrated mind could interpret. "We are the crystalline magi, observers of galactic cycles." I had never heard of such beings, either in Imperial teachings or in the fragmentary knowledge absorbed from the Necron technology. They existed outside the familiar conflicts of the galaxy, outside the endless war between organic life, chaos, and the Necron dynasties. "What do you want with me?" I asked, the question formed in my mind and somehow transmitted to them without spoken words. "You represent an unprecedented convergence," the central figure responded. "Necron phase metal integrated with human consciousness, 2 opposed evolutionary paths merging. This has not occurred in any previous cycle." "Previous cycle?" "The galaxy dies and is reborn," another of the crystalline beings explained. "Organic life rises, falls, transforms. Patterns repeat with variations. We observe, record, preserve key specimens and knowledge across cycles." The implications were staggering. These beings claimed to have witnessed multiple iterations of galactic civilization, to have observed the rise and fall of species across timescales that dwarfed even the ancient history of the Necrons or Eldar. "You said you seek reversal," the third figure interjected. "Return to human form. This may not be possible. The integration proceeds toward completion. Soon, a new state of being will emerge, neither human nor Necron but something unprecedented." "Can you not help me?" I asked, desperation coloring the transmitted thought. "Your technology, your knowledge, must far exceed what is available at the Nexus." The crystalline beings conferred among themselves, a rapid exchange of energy patterns I could partially sense but not interpret. "We do not intervene directly," the central figure finally responded, "but we recognize the value of your unique convergence. We propose exchange. Grant us permission to study the integration process. Allow us to record the emergence of this new state of being. In return, we will provide knowledge, options." "What kind of options?" "3 paths lie before you," the being explained. "First, continuation of the current integration. Emergence as a unique hybrid entity with capabilities beyond either human or Necron limitation. Second, acceleration toward full transformation. Abandonment of remaining organic components, ascension to a new form of Necron existence with retained human cognitive patterns. Third, separation, painful, partial, imperfect. Return to approximate human form with permanent alterations and reduced lifespan. The third option was what I had sought since my escape from the tomb world. A return to humanity, even imperfect, even brief. Yet now, faced with these ancient beings and their perspective that spanned galactic cycles, I found myself considering the alternatives with new understanding. What was humanity, truly, but one brief evolutionary moment in the cosmos. The Imperium taught that the human form was sacred, that deviation was heresy. But standing before beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless species, such dogma seemed provincial, limited. "Show me," I requested. "Show me what each path would mean." The crystalline chamber around us shifted, its walls becoming transparent to reveal 3 separate chambers beyond. In each, a version of myself existed, illustrating the potential outcomes of each choice. In the first, I saw a being that still resembled a human in general form, but with the Necron technology fully integrated, no longer hidden beneath skin but forming an exoskeleton of living metal. This being moved with fluid grace, manipulating energy fields with thought alone, interfacing with technology of various origins without effort. In the second, I saw something far less human, a Necron form, skeletal and imposing, yet with movements and posture that betrayed its origin as Ral Vex. The green fire of its eyes seemed to contain depths of understanding, of memory, that standard Necron warriors lacked. It was studying what appeared to be human artifacts with a reverence that no true Necron would display. In the third, I saw what appeared to be myself as I had been before desertion, before the tomb world. A human man in simple clothing. But as I watched, I noticed the differences. Patches of skin with metallic sheen, eyes that occasionally flickered with green light, movements interrupted by spasms of pain. This version of myself was dying slowly, the separated Necron technology leaving behind damage that could never fully heal. "These are not predictions," the crystalline being clarified, "merely representations of possibility based on our analysis. The actual outcome of each path would be influenced by many factors, including your own will and the specific methods employed." I turned away from the visions, my thoughts churning. None of the options offered true return to what I had been. The Ral Vex who had deserted the Imperial Guard was gone forever, transformed first by his rejection of Imperial doctrine and then by his integration with Xenos technology. "What would you choose?" I asked the crystalline beings, curious about their perspective. "We do not choose for others," the central figure replied. "We observe, we record. The value lies in diversity of paths, in the unique patterns each consciousness weaves through existence." A non-answer, but perhaps wisdom nonetheless. These beings had survived across multiple galactic cycles by observing rather than participating, by preserving knowledge without imposing direction. "If I agree to let you study me, how long would this process take?" I asked. "Time flows differently within our habitats," the third figure explained. "What might seem as years of study to us would be experienced as days for you. When the process is complete, we would provide you with the means to implement whichever path you choose and transport to your desired destination." It was a generous offer, assuming their intentions were as stated. But I had learned caution through bitter experience. "And if I decline?" "Then we return you to your original course," the central figure said. "We do not compel, we only offer knowledge in exchange for knowledge." I considered my options carefully. The Nexus might offer solutions, but from a technological level far below what these crystalline magi possessed. Their claimed perspective across galactic cycles suggested a depth of understanding no human or even Necron scientist could match. Yet there was something unsettling about their detachment, their position as mere observers of the galaxy's endless conflicts and transformations. What did it mean to stand outside history in such a way? What perspective did it grant, and what humanity did it cost? In that moment, I realized something crucial about my own condition. What I feared most was not the physical transformation, not the integration with Xenos technology, but the loss of my human perspective. The capacity for empathy, for moral judgment, for recognizing the value of individual lives amid the vast indifference of the cosmos. The Imperium had tried to strip that from me through indoctrination, through the brutal calculus that justified burning worlds to maintain order. The Necron technology threatened to replace it with cold immortality and the perspective of beings who had sacrificed their souls for eternal existence. What path would preserve not just my human form, but my human heart? "I accept your offer," I told the crystalline beings. "Study me, but in return, I want more than just the technical knowledge to implement these options. I want to understand what each truly means. Not just for my physical form, but for my consciousness, my soul, if such a thing exists." The central figure inclined its crystalline head in what might have been a gesture of respect. "A wise request. Understanding is the foundation of true choice. We will share what we know of consciousness across its many forms, organic and otherwise. The rest is for you to determine." And so began my time among the crystalline magi, a period that seemed to exist outside normal space and time. They studied the integration of Necron technology with my human biology, the emerging hybrid consciousness that resulted. I, in turn, studied them and the vast repository of knowledge they had accumulated across what they claimed were multiple cycles of galactic civilization. I learned of species long extinct before humanity's ascension, of technologies beyond even the Necron's understanding, of philosophical traditions that viewed the universe in ways no Imperial scholar had ever conceived. Most importantly, I learned about consciousness itself. The crystalline magi possessed records of mind states across countless species and technological platforms. They understood how consciousness adapted to new substrates, how memory and identity persisted or transformed through radical physical change. "What you call your soul," one of the magi explained during a session where they mapped the interface between my organic brain and the Necron filaments, "is neither purely physical nor entirely separate from your physical form. It is a pattern, a process, an ongoing organization of information and experience that creates continuity of self." "Does that pattern survive when the physical form changes completely?" I asked. "It can," the magi replied, "but the pattern also changes in response to its new substrate. A consciousness transferred to a mechanical form does not experience reality the same way. Its priorities shift, its perception alters. Whether this constitutes survival or replacement depends on your definition of self." These philosophical discussions continued alongside the physical examination. The magi were thorough, dispassionate, yet respectful. They treated me neither as an abomination nor as a specimen, but as a unique consciousness undergoing a transformation of significance to their studies. As promised, they eventually presented me with detailed information on all three possible paths: the technical requirements, the likely outcomes, the existential implications of each choice. They added a fourth option I had not considered: stasis, preservation in crystal suspension, unchanged, until some future cycle might offer better solutions. I declined the fourth option immediately. Whatever I chose to become, I would face it consciously, not hide in frozen limbo while the galaxy continued its endless wars without me. The choice ultimately came down to a question of identity. What defined Ral Vex? Was it the human form I had been born into? The memories and experiences that shaped me? The capacity for choice itself? In the end, I chose a modified version of the first path. Not full integration that would create a hybrid entity of equal parts human and Necron, but a controlled balance. The Necron technology would remain, its capabilities available to me, but subordinate to my human consciousness. My physical form would continue to appear largely human, though with visible modifications that could never be fully concealed. The process was not simple. The crystalline magi worked with precision beyond any human or Necron technology I had witnessed. They adjusted the interface between organic and mechanical components, established boundaries for the integration, created safeguards against further uncontrolled transformation. When it was complete, I stood before them changed yet familiar to myself. My skin bore traceries of silver where the Necron filaments ran close to the surface. My eyes still flickered with green fire when I accessed certain capabilities, but I felt human in the ways that mattered most. My emotions, my capacity for empathy, my sense of connection to my own past. "The integration is stabilized," the central magi informed me. It will neither progress further nor reverse without deliberate intervention. The capabilities granted by the Necron technology will remain accessible but will not dominate your consciousness. What am I now? I asked, examining my altered hands where silver lines traced the paths of veins beneath the skin. You are the first of your kind, the Magi replied, neither human by imperial definition nor Necron by their ancient parameters, a new pattern of consciousness occupying a hybrid substrate. What you become from this point forward is determined by your choices, not your composition. They provided me with a small crystal, a communication device that would allow me to contact them should circumstances require. Then, true to their word, they offered to transport me to any destination within their considerable range. I considered returning to the Nexus as originally planned, but that seemed unnecessary now. The knowledge I sought had been provided by the crystalline Magi. The question of where to go instead was more difficult. I could not return to Imperial space. Even with my condition stabilized, I remained a deserter, a heretic, an abomination by Imperial standards. The Inquisition would burn me without hesitation if discovered. I could not return to Hadrian's Rest. The Marshal had made it clear that I would not be welcome, and I had no wish to bring trouble to their isolated colony. There are others like you, the Magi said, sensing my uncertainty. Not identical, but similar. Beings who exist between established categories. Exiles who have found places to exist beyond the reach of galactic powers. Where would I find such beings? I asked. The borders of reality, came the cryptic response. Where the material universe meets other dimensions. Regions avoided by both the Imperium and Xenos powers due to navigational hazards or warp anomalies. Places where the rules of existence are more flexible. It was a direction rather than a specific destination, but it was enough. I thanked the crystalline Magi for their assistance and prepared to depart in the Necron vessel, now as much a part of me as my own limbs. Before I left, the central Magi offered one final observation. Your journey began with an attempt to escape the Imperium of man, yet everywhere you traveled, you found only different forms of control, different demands for submission. The Necrons, the Eldar, even us, with our offer of knowledge in exchange for study. I nodded, recognizing the truth in these words. Perhaps true escape is not found in physical distance from the Imperium, the Magi continued, but in transcending the binary thinking it represents. The belief that one must be either human or Xenos, loyal or heretical, pure or corrupted. You now exist as living proof that such categories are insufficient. With those words to contemplate, I departed the crystalline habitat, my vessel once again carrying me into the void between stars. But now the vessel responded to my will with perfect harmony, the integration between us stabilized and controlled. I was neither its master nor its prisoner, but its extension and it mine. I set course for the regions the Magi had described, the borderlands where reality itself grew thin. Not with the desperate hope of escaping the Imperium that had driven me initially, but with curiosity about what existence might be possible beyond the structures and conflicts that defined the known galaxy. The Imperium would continue its endless wars. The Necrons would rise from more tomb worlds. Chaos would corrupt. Orcs would conquer. Eldar would manipulate. The great powers would play out their ancient conflicts across countless worlds. But I would chart a different course, neither human nor Xenos, neither loyal nor heretical, neither pure nor corrupted, something new, something between. What happens when you try to escape the Imperium? You discover that true escape requires more than physical distance. It requires transcending the very categories by which the Imperium defines reality. I am Ral Vex. I am something else. I am becoming. And the void between stars is wide enough for one more wanderer seeking his own truth.